the question whether it is even appropriate to talk about this openly. Hmm? The fact of the matter is, to be very honest, the question should rather be, how is not talking about it appropriate? For what is truly appropriate for a Muslim is to strive to speak the truth and be honest. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا مع الصادقين. Be conscious of Allah and be with those who are true. So what's truly appropriate for a Muslim is not to hold back knowledge that is beneficial and useful, now whether it is about worldly matters or matters of the hereafter. What's truly appropriate for a Muslim is not to turn a blind eye towards a reality that's ignored much, hence has escalated much, due to not being addressed appropriately by the appropriate people at the appropriate time. Have we forgotten that this is the least we can do? That Rasulullah SAW guided us in Sahih Muslim, for instance, when he says, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi, fa illam yastati' fa bi lisani, fa illam yastati' fa bi qalbi, wa dhalika ad'aful iman." Did not Rasulullah say, "Whosoever of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand"? That's the most appropriate for a Muslim to do in this circumstance. That's the most appropriate for a Muslim to do in such a situation, to change it with their hands. If he's not able to do, then with his tongue. This is Rasulullah's guidance. Then how can we debate it? If he's not even able to do that, yani through his tongue, then with his heart, and that's the weakest of Iman. We are trying to do the second in order to be able to do the first. But the least we can do is the last, and to deny any of them is to go against the Sunnah of Rasulullah.
I am a creative director and I want to raise awareness about.
I am a male member of the society and I want to learn how to raise awareness about.
I'm a healthcare professional and I want to learn how to help victims heal from.
I am a single Muslim guy and as a potential family man, I want to learn how to prevent.
I am a psychotherapist and I want to raise awareness about.
I am a father of 2 teenagers and I want to learn about the reality of
Sexual abuse.
Child sexual abuse.
Child sexual abuse.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome all to those who have joined us live. Thank you so much for your patience as we were doing a recap of the last couple sessions, just some important points. And we appreciate all those who have commented in the chat box as well about the things that you had learned last week and the sessions before that. So, Alhamdulillah, we have reached our third session and final session in this workshop series on child sexual abuse. And we hope that you have listened to the previous two sessions as well. And summing up this, we have a wonderful, inshallah, very well-versed expert and guest speaker today with us here with us today, Dr. Venus Mahmoodi, and I will be introducing her a little bit later. But just to get us started, as a reminder, I've explained this the last couple of times, as a reminder about the disclaimers that we are talking about, something that could be very triggering for people, and if you don't feel emotionally well or safe, then please feel free to leave and seek out help at any time, and making sure that the comments and the language that we use in the chat box is very supportive and understanding towards everyone and not nullifying anybody. And just a reminder that we do use clear and explicit language throughout this presentation, so just to be aware of that. And today, actually, it's not just going to be our guest speaker, Dr. Venus Mahmoodi, but after her session, there will be a question and answer session coming up. So I have collected a lot of questions from the registration form, from the comment section, and different questions that were sent to us, and I've included them here for any of the three guest speakers. That's myself and Dr. Venus and Ustaza Aisha. So if you have additional questions, then please, as soon as possible, include them in the chat comment section, and I can try to collect them. I can't promise that we can get to all of them, but inshallah, as many as we can. I'm very excited about that section as well. And as a reminder, we will be having a prayer break at 10 minutes until the next hour. So we'll be having a prayer break then. So as a reminder where we've been in this tree, we talked about this since the beginning of this workshop series 2 weeks ago, and each time we've revisited it. So we've gone through all of these things as well as the various prevention aspects that happen at each level, which we did last time. And then this time we're going to be focusing on what helps victims heal. So what can we do to minimize those effects, to help victims recover from those effects in as supportive way as possible. So to help us understand that discussion and take us through that discussion, we have with us, alhamdulillah, we're very blessed and happy to have with us Dr. Venus Mahmoodi. She has received her PhD and MS in clinical psychology from Palo Alto University, associated with Stanford University, and she is currently a licensed clinical psychologist. She's currently the clinical supervisor and managing director for Khalil Center in New York City, and she's also an adjunct assistant professor in psychology with Columbia University in New York. And so we're very, very happy to have her with us to shed light on this topic, and I think it's a very special treat that you will be able to ask her questions as well, inshallah. So with that, what I'll do is I'll hand it over to her. I'm going to just switch the presentations, so give us a second while we fix that up.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you so much to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my knowledge and my understanding of this very important topic. Um, it's quite an honor to be here. Thank you so much for your kind words. So I've come to know that for the past 2 sessions you've talked about um, child sexual abuse in a different context. And what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about how to heal from childhood sexual abuse or child sexual abuse. And it's going to first cover areas that we're going to focus on within the healing. So we might cover a little bit of what you've already discussed in the previous 2 sessions. But I want you to be very clear about what it is that we're healing, what it is that we're looking at, and what it is that we're trying to help someone move through. So here's a brief outline of what I'd like to cover. I'm going to share some of my own reflections, my own thoughts about childhood sexual abuse and my understandings through my trainings and through the work I've done with patients. We'll discuss some general symptoms that we see, and then I will cover very specific aspects of someone's biopsychosocial experience of childhood trauma. And then we'll talk about interventions that are specific to these domains. And then we'll finish up with some important considerations when both through your own well-being and your own healing, but also how others might be able to make sure that they're providing a space of healing. So here are some of my reflections. I've been doing this work for a while now, and having both worked with children who were sexually abused as well as adults, childhood sexual abuse can significantly impact development. The development of the child occurs in, some people say it happens in stages. Some people say that it happens, continuously over time. But one thing that we know is that an experience like childhood sexual abuse will disrupt the normative experiences of a child. And it really kind of puts a hard stop on some of the experiences that the child has and needs to have in order to move through their development into adulthood. The other thing we have to understand is that we really try to create a safe world for our children. And when they experience some level of sexual abuse as a child, the world becomes unsafe. And when the world becomes unsafe and scary, it really makes it a very difficult place to live. And you will see the consequences of that experience of feeling unsafe and the feeling of being scared all the time. And so we have to think about this question of how can we make the world safe again? How can we help this person, or how can we help you feel safe in the world once again? And what's interesting is that whenever I've worked with small children, parents will come and say, well, how do we know what happened to our child? Like, how do we know, they were so young, or I don't remember everything that happened to me. And in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter what all the details are. What's important is what they do remember, and also how are they functioning currently? How are they working through this world, either as a child that's moving through their experience of childhood trauma, or as an adult trying to survive in the adult world and trying to be, trying to function in all domains of life. And what I mean by that is in their marriage, in their career, in their life at home, in all these different aspects. So these are just some reflections, some thoughts that I want to start you off with, so that you have an understanding of where it is that I'm coming from, and some of my personal reflections on this topic. So here are some kind of general signs and symptoms. Someone who experiences any kind of traumatic experience, any kind of traumatic event might experience re-experiencing or reliving. It might be through dreams. It might be through a trigger. Something just arouses this fear within them. They see what happened to them in a very vivid way. There's hyper arousal, which is a physiological activation where they're constantly looking around and fearful for their safety. There might be a lot of fear and anxiety. Hypoarousal is a numbing, that they're not really engaging in their environment. Emotional dysregulation, we will talk about this one at length momentarily. Relationship challenges, cognitive distortions, we will also talk about this one. Avoidance, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts. These are consequences of experiencing a childhood sexual trauma. And so it's important that these are not things that someone can control. These are things that happen because they've been violated, that their sense of safety has been significantly violated. So I'm going to be taking a biopsychosocial approach to trauma, which means that we're going to look at three main aspects of trauma experiences. We will look at the biological, we will look at the psychological, and then the social, because these are essentially the domains of our functioning, right? Our bodies have to function, our thoughts and emotions are important aspects to our functioning, and then our social connections are important to our functioning. So all of these different things are components, are important to how we function in this world. And what happens when this is disrupted by a traumatic event, especially a traumatic event in childhood? So the first thing we're going to discuss is attachment. And this is really important because it is a biological system that's been in place that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in us to make sure that we survive in this world. So it elicits care and love from our parents, and it allows us to know that we're safe in the world. And so what's important about attachment is that we can grow up in a household that is full of safety and care and love. And then an abuse happens and it changes that. And so someone's attachment can go from being very secure and and feeling very safe in the world to feeling very unsafe. However, there are also those who experience a lack of safety from the moment they're born. Maybe their mother has experienced a lot of trauma during her pregnancy or in her life prior. So someone might be born into this world reactive to the intensity of what of what the world is showing them, right? Their mother might not be as caring and as loving because of her traumatic experiences. And so they are already in a state of being insecure in their attachment. And we'll discuss the terms in a moment. However, this will also make them more vulnerable to experiencing childhood sexual abuse. So we're going to approach it from two ends, right? Someone who is feeling safe in the world and then something tragic happens, or those who are already in a difficult state, something tragic happens, and then their struggle through life. So that's why we're going to discuss attachment. And it is actually one of my most favorite topics to discuss and think about and share. So we start off with Bowlby here. He is the one who just developed this theory of attachment, and it actually came from his own experiences of childhood trauma. He was neglected severely by his own mother, and he had a very difficult childhood. And he ended up being exposed to a lot of children who were in the juvenile delinquent system in the UK, and he noticed that all of them had really difficult childhoods, that all of them really struggled with their early childhood lives, and that their parents weren't there to really support them and love them and care for them. And so as he developed this understanding, he developed the theory of attachment. And it's essentially what he said is that attachment is a powerful emotional connection to a particular person that promotes a baby's or a child's sense of security, right? So that's what attachment does. It allows us to feel safe and secure in the world. So the primary caregiver, could be mom, could be dad, could be grandma, could be auntie, could be any person in their life that is able to meet the physical and psychological needs. So think about a baby, right? A baby, as soon as the baby is born, it's so helpless, right? It's sitting there, it doesn't know what to do. It like, it could accidentally hit itself in the eye and it won't be able to control its arms and legs or anything. And it's sitting there just waiting for someone to feed it, someone to swaddle it, someone to change its diaper, someone to take care of it in every way needed. And so as soon as the baby cries and someone goes and picks it up and holds it, it feels like, okay, every time I cry, someone comes and holds me. So that's essentially what attachment is. So we do see different attachment styles, and these attachment styles are going to influence the way we form relationships throughout our lives. It teaches us how to love, how to be loved, and how others might love us. And so it's a two-way street, but it's also very fluid. So you're not going to see an attachment style that's the same with everybody. One person, and there might be a stronger attachment with another person, it might be less of an attachment. But it really can change over time. It can change moment by moment. But there are various styles, various patterns that we see in the relationships with various family members or spouses or children. It is really a biobehavioral system that is linked to both positive emotions as well as negative emotions across the lifspan. So it's something that we really want to, talk about in this scope, because it really helps us understand the emotional connections that people have to the world, not just to the person that's caring for them, but to the world at large. And it's also a system of managing distress. So if you think about a toddler, right, that by this time the child knows how to walk. And so what they do is, they'll kind of tiptoe away from their parent. They'll look at their mom or their dad, and then they'll tiptoe a little bit more, start playing with a toy. Once in a while, they'll look at their parent like, oh, they're right there, and they'll continue playing. And then if they fall and bump their knee or something, they come running back to their mom, and mom gives them a hug, right? So it teaches a child to know when to be close and seek help and when not to, when they can go and explore and be curious. So how does attachment work, right? So it works on these three kind of general areas. The first is the biological, right? So the attachment figure, whether it's mom, dad, grandma, auntie, whoever, is going to be the safe harbor. It's going to be, this person is going to be the secure base. And in times of distress, the child will seek proximity, closeness to help manage their emotions, regulate their emotions, right? They fell, they're distressed, they're sad, and now they're going to come running back to mom, hey, mom, I need help. And there's a biological system in place that will push them towards that. So regardless of whether mom or dad are receptive and hugging and willing to show that love, that is something that is innate in every single child, that they run towards their primary caregiver when they're in distress. Behaviorally, what we see is that it's an exploratory system, that when a child feels secure, they're willing to explore their environment and be curious. And you'll see this in schools, right? There are some students who are really willing to try everything and anything, and there's other students who are just like meek in the background, not really too scared to share anything. The other part of it is psychological. And we see this in conjunction with emotions within relationships. How do people form relationships with their parents, with their spouses, with their children, with their friends, and how are they maintained? So attachment really plays a significant role in our behaviors to be curious and also our social interactions. And one thing to understand is that the brain is reset every single time there's an experience of separation and reunion, right? So the baby has just woken up from a nap. It's crying, crying, crying. It's in distress. As soon as their mother picks them up, their brains reset. Everything's safe. But think about it, right? What if someone doesn't come and pick up the baby, right? That is what we're worried about, is that if the baby isn't picked up in that moment, then they're going to be in a lot of distress. And also, we have to look at, fit. Sometimes certain personalities require a certain type of caregiving. And so if the parent isn't able to provide that level of caregiving, that can affect their attachment type. So I know we've spent a lot of time on these parts, but I really want you all to understand how attachment works because this will affect everything else. All the other things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about biological effects of trauma, psychological effects of trauma, and social aspects. So all of these are connected to attachment, which is why we're spending a little bit of time on this. So here are the different attachment styles, right? Attachment theory kind of has this, has a really important understanding around love and loss. What happens when I'm in distress and I've lost something? What happens when I feel love and caring? So we really see kind of this balance between dependence and independence. With secure folks, they're really able to balance it, and then we get to disorganized and it's just really completely unknown what the person needs at the time that they're seeking it. So they're in distress, they want their mom, and then all of a sudden they don't want their mom. So we're going to see this kind of on a spectrum. And then we have this concept of earned security, which I won't talk about right now. We're going to talk about it when we talk about healing and getting better. That what happens if someone doesn't have a secure attachment, we can move them into what is called earned security. So let's start off with the secure attachment. So this is where the child knows who their safe haven is. It's either their mother, their father, their aunt or uncle, whoever the person is that is most important in their life. They're able to soothe themselves when they're in distress. They can tolerate separation because during those early months of when they were first born, their needs were consistently met. So, sometimes, people say, well, what about cry it out? They leave their child. Well, that's a whole other conversation. It's not relevant to this. This is essentially being neglectful, right? We're talking about neglect versus meeting the child's needs. The child needs to be soothed. The mother is there to soothe the baby. However, there are times when, that you allow the child to cry and they should be able to self-soothe because they've learned that they're safe. They just need to do something to take care of themselves in that moment. And as adults, we learn to self-soothe a lot, but for a child, they really have to learn it. They go from someone taking full care of themselves and slowly becoming more and more independent. They're able when we see there are a lot of experiments out there that have tested these attachment styles, and when there is a separation, the child is in a lot of distress, and when there's a reunion, they're able to regulate their emotions and know that they're safe and that their mom is there to take care of them. So we really see a great balance between independence and dependence. That's the kind of hallmark, is that there's a good balance between seeking support when needed and also being independent, being able to do the things they need to do in their life. With an anxiously attached person, what we see is that their caregiver showed a lack of attuned care and inconsistent parenting. So there were times that maybe mom was very loving and supportive, and there were times that mom wasn't loving and supportive. And so they really had a hard time with being separated. As soon as mom leaves, they just break down and cry and cry and cry. When mom returns, they still cry and cry and cry, but cling really tightly onto her. And they're continually seeking proximity. They want to be close at all times. They can't self-soothe. They need somebody else to help regulate their emotions for them. So you can see these also as adults. They're very clingy, they're very dependent, and they can't be alone. They feel really uncomfortable being alone. And then you have the avoidant attachment. This one, very similar start to the anxiously attached person, where there is inconsistent parental care. They stay away from the parent in order to be safe. They think, I can take care of myself. I don't really need anyone to do anything for me. I know how to live this world. And you'll see like little kids, they'll go make themselves food, they'll watch TV, they'll do whatever it is that they need to do on their own, and they don't ask for help. They will never ask for help. And these people tend to be very high achieving. They're very smart. They're very well meaning, but but they don't have really meaningful relationships in their lives, and they really have a hard time with anxiety. So they can't really, um, they have a really hard time engaging with their emotions. They kind of separate their emotions from themselves, so they don't really recognize what emotions they feel, how to express emotions, and they tend to be pretty isolated. So they don't have strong, meaningful relationships. They tend to have more surface level relationships where people praise them um, for being very uh, smart, or they're, they're looking at their achievements and recognizing them for their achievements. So these people tend to be skewed towards the independent. They're more self-sufficient. They have a lot of superficial relationships. And then we have disorganized attachment. These people tend to have a lot of trauma in their lives. They've already experienced trauma from the time that they were born. Their parents were likely traumatized people. There's a lot of emotional and cognitive shutdown, which means that they really have a hard time in knowing what their emotions are, knowing what their thoughts are. They want proximity, right? Because remember, this is a biological system, right? The biological system comes online. They want closeness to their family member, and then they're rejected and hurt. So then they kind of like feel defeated, and then and in distress, and so the system is online again, so they're seeking closeness, and then they're pushed away again. So it creates this very unhealthy cycle where they're kind of like seeking proximity, pushed away, seeking proximity, pushed away. And there are times where their caregiver might want to hug them, and they'll, throw themselves on the ground and cry. And there's other times they want their caregiver, but the caregiver is not available. So it's a very distressing experience for the child. And there's no sense of safety, and there's no sense of predictability. So what do these styles tell us about healing? Um, Attachment style really plays a significant role in our healing because it helps us understand what we do when we're in distress. When someone is in distress, who do they seek help from? Do they seek help? Do they want to be connected to others or not? So it's really important for us to understand the balance of independence and dependence that someone experiences when they're feeling distressed. So after an event of childhood sexual trauma or child sexual trauma, um, what happens? Do they go to their parent and say something happened to me? And do they feel safe enough to do that? Or are they an avoidant person who is not going to connect with anybody, not say anything? Or an anxious person who's just going to cling and not be able to say anything? So it's really important for us to understand the attachment style of the person that is going through this challenge. And remember that attachment is not stagnant. It's going to consistently change, um, and the trauma will affect the person's attachment. If they are already securely attached and then a trauma happens, they might change the balance, right? They might be someone who is always wanting to be around their family and wanting to spend time, and then all of a sudden they isolate themselves. So it's important to kind of get to know ourselves and our family members to see what is it, how do they react when they're in distress. And our goal is to help those who are in insecure, um, have an insecure attachment, to build, earn security, to build a sense of security with the people that are around them and the people that they do deem to be important in their lives. So now we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about neurobiology and the brain, and we're going to talk about how the brain is altered and kind of the key players in the brain, and kind of perpetuating a sense of unsafety and perpetuating a sense of feeling distressed. The thing that we know is that the brain is altered by trauma. Trauma can affect how our brain functions and the pathways that are within the brain. And we're talking about child sexual trauma, which means that there's a lot of brain development happening very early on in a child's life. There's times where they have all these different connections, and there's times where there's a lot of connections being cut because they're not used, and there's a lot of movement happening in the brain in those first 5 years. And so if there is a traumatic event during that time, it can really affect things. And then there's another big event that happens in adolescence, right, where there's pathways that are kind of reinforced and there's pathways that are removed. So you can think that if there has been a traumatic event happening anytime in childhood, that during these big events where the brain is being reorganized, it can really have a long-lasting impact. So we really want to also emphasize the two areas of the brain that are implicated in trauma, which are the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Those who are in this survival brain are kind of really run by their amygdala, and people who have a balanced brain are able to manage both the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Well, let's look at what their roles are, and hopefully we're able to get through this part before our break. So here, if you kind of put your hand with your palm facing up, and you put your thumb down on your palm, and your four fingers on top, what you see is that your thumb is the amygdala, which is deep, deep, deep inside the brain, and your four knuckles that are in front of you is the prefrontal cortex. And so the information that your brain gets first is in the amygdalas, right? So you can see the brainstem right there. The information, so your arm is like essentially the brainstem. The information goes up the arm to the amygdala, right up the brainstem into the amygdala. And that's where things get processed first. And after it's processed in that region, it comes to the outside of the brain, right? So the middle of the brain gets developed first, and then the outside. And the middle part of the brain is something that all animals with brains have, but not all animals have this prefrontal cortex, this kind of outer layer of the brain. So what do they do, and why is it significant of where things get processed first? So the amygdala processes negative emotions. It is the alarm system of the entire body. And what happens is that it is where we scan for safety. It is how we deal with emotions like fear and anxiety and anger. And it really kind of helps us understand safety and harm. If the amygdala kind of scans the environment, you're safe, you're good. But if there's harm, right, it reacts, the alarm goes off, and then we see a whole set of experiences that happen after that, which we will cover in the next slide. And so if someone has experienced a significant trauma, they're not able to engage in the environment. Their amygdala is constantly blaring, 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 and they don't feel safe. And it really prevents them from being present and being in the moment and being connected to their bodies, because their amygdala is saying, hey, there's something really bad happening. You need to be on alert, even if the environment is completely safe. So that's something to be aware of, that if someone's amygdala is going, 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 they can't be in the moment. They can't just calm down and be in the moment. And so if someone experiences an event, right, it's going to be processed in the amygdala first. And if it's someone who has a trauma brain, that survival brain, right, the amygdala is going to turn on and it's going to shut down the prefrontal cortex. Right? And what does the prefrontal cortex do? Well, this is the place where you plan for things, execute those plans, your rational thinking. This is the captain of the ship. It steers the ship. It tells us where to go. It tells us how to do things. And when the amygdala is kind of blaring, the alarm is blaring, it kind of tells the prefrontal cortex, we don't need you right now because there's an emergency, and it's, we need to deal with this first. Who cares about steering the ship right now? And it really affects productivity. It really affects being able to do things in the moment. So something to be aware of, right? That everything starts with the amygdala when someone's has been traumatized. It starts with the amygdala, and once the amygdala is turned on, they're unable to function in the world in a safe way. So this leads us to think about, like, okay, so what does it mean for the amygdala to be turned on? Well, if you look at the green area, this is how someone with a secure attachment might function in the world, right? They're able to be in the present, they're able to feel joy, they're curious, they're engaging with everything in the world in a safe way. They might experience distress, right? And so you see that squiggly line, that's essentially, this line right here, that's essentially what, the level of distress looks like. They experience the distress and then it comes back down. When someone is activated by their amygdala, um, they are going to fall into this fight or flight mode, right? And so you see panic, fear, anxiety, rage, anger, and it just keeps going. And the person is just feeling really overwhelmed and really, there's all these physiological symptoms that are coming up because they are in this intense state. And then if that doesn't get resolved, we will enter the state of freeze. And this is where you kind of stop engaging with the world altogether. There's dissociation, mind and body are disconnected, there's numbness, depression, helplessness, shutdown. So if you think about this as, kind of a gazelle running through the savannah, right? It's kind of in this green zone, feeling happy, feeling great, just hopping around. And then the lion comes and starts chasing it. So it gets really scared and says, oh no, right? Their sympathetic nervous system is increasing in activation. So they start running, right? Because they're scared and they're worried that they're going to get caught and they're just running as fast as they can, right? Their heart rate increases, their adrenaline is coursing through their veins. And then the lion catches it. And when it gets to that point, it tries to break free, and then it can't. And it just sort of says, you know what? That's it. I can't change this. I'm stuck here. And it feels helpless and hopeless and it just gives in. It just gives up. So here's a quick summary of that. Um, the sympathetic nervous system gets activated. There's feelings of intense anger, fear, and frustration. If these do not get resolved, there is a sense of dissociation, numbness, helplessness, and hopelessness, and eventually people give up. And so here are some of the physiological symptoms that we see. The body is holding a lot of the traumatic memories. Sometimes these just come pouring out, and the body feels very overwhelmed and very, right? And we see things like increased heart rate, changes in breathing, other physical experiences like sweaty palms, poor concentration, and just feeling disconnected from the body. So these are physiological symptoms that happen when the sympathetic nervous system is activated. And we see that this is a very physical experience. And a lot of times people aren't aware that these are things that are happening. They're not aware that their heart rate has increased. They're not aware that their breathing has changed. They're not aware that they aren't able to be present in the moment. A lot of times people think that they're just functioning well. So I think what we'll do, we'll pause here since this is the completion of the physiological and biological system.
Great. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Venus. This is a really, I learned so much from this overview so far that you've given. And I think the whole audience has also been learning, alhamdulillah. So inshallah, we will take our prayer break now. We will have 10 minutes for those who are praying Fajr in the US or Asr in Pakistan. So we'll join exactly in 10 minutes on the hour, inshallah, to learn more about what Dr. Venus has to explain for us, inshallah. All right, assalamu alaikum. All right, Alhamdulillah, we have completed our prayer break. Thank you for being patient with us as we took some extra time due to some time changes. So we will go ahead and continue with Dr. Venus to her discussion, inshallah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Go ahead, Dr. Venus.
Okay, Bismillah. So just to kind of summarize a little bit, I know that I spoke very quickly about the biological systems related to trauma, and if you're a psychotherapist or you're a survivor who's interested in learning more, you can. There is a book called The Polyvagal Theory by Stephen Porges, and he explains. Let me just go back. So he explains this is from his book, and he explains this whole system. And so if you are interested in learning more about the systematic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system and how they work together, it can be helpful in understanding trauma and how to support someone. And there are actually books now on how to use the polyvagal system in psychotherapy as well. The other book that I would recommend for folks is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. He writes extensively about the treatment of trauma using these biological systems and building systems that connect the mind and the body. So I would recommend those two authors and those two books. And I know I talked about this very, very quickly, and so I definitely want to make sure that you have a good understanding of the biological systems because they're so important to the experience of trauma, especially trauma that is experienced in childhood. So let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about thoughts and cognitions. I mean, thoughts and cognitions are essentially the same thing, but for the sake of making sure we all understand, the word cognitions, it's essentially thoughts. It's just brain processes. So what we often see is that there are a lot of thoughts that are distorted. All of these thoughts, any thought that someone has, they're felt to be true. And so what I mean by that is that even if the thought is not true, even if the thought is a distortion or something that someone has just, like they say, oh, I'm so ugly. That's a distortion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, in the most beautiful way. And so and typically when I talk to people, I'm like, really? Do you really think that? They know that they're not ugly, but everyone just deems, people who experience trauma really deem their thoughts to be true. Even if rationally they're able to kind of think about it, they think, maybe this thought isn't true. And even within the scope of Islam, within our deen, we know that thoughts come from different sources. We know that some thoughts come from the nafs, and we know that some thoughts come from shaitan, and we know some thoughts come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the angels. And so, these thoughts are likely to be from the nafs, and they're coming from our own selves. These are not thoughts that we can deem to be true because they are coming from ourselves. If they're coming from the angels, mashallah, it's a beautiful thing. And I hope that we all get those beautiful thoughts. But thoughts are often distorted when someone experiences a trauma, and especially sexual trauma, as a child. So and you can see kind of these patterns that emerge around their thinking, where they're able to offer compassion for others. And I've heard the most beautiful things like, oh, this person, I really cared for them. I really took care of them. I really offered this support to them. And for themselves, there's not that same level of compassion and care. It's not the same by any means. And sometimes I point out the discrepancy. I'm like, with your friend or with your sister or with your brother or with your mother, you're showing such beautiful compassion and care and love. And with yourself, you're so harsh and so mean. And sometimes the things people say, I'm just like, oh, that's just so mean. You would never say this to another person. What if your friend came right now and said, I'm stupid or I'm ugly or I'm, and people hear these types of you know, words being said. And I'm like, do you really truly believe that? And sometimes it's, yes, I do. And if your friend came to you and actually said this, would you believe them? And they'll say, no, of course, I would challenge it. I would say, no, this is not right. But for themselves, they don't see themselves in that same light. And so what's important to kind of take away from all of this is that it's more about what it feels like rather than the rational thinking around, oh, these are distortions. These are not correct thoughts. These are not true thoughts. It's what it feels like. These thoughts come into their minds and they just feel bad. And it just feels so bad. And so they just stay within that feeling bad because also feeling bad is familiar. Feeling good is not familiar. Feeling bad is familiar. And so even though it feels bad, you know, some of you might think like, why would you want to feel that? Because it's familiar. We also see a lot of high expectations in this group. We see, you know, whether it's a child or an adult who's experienced childhood sexual trauma, there's a lot of high expectations that they set for themselves. That even when they reach a goal, like I've heard things like, yeah, okay, so I did that. So what? I'm like, you just did this. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I did that. I should do more. I should work harder. I should do this. So you know, that's why I say, you know, right next to it, I have should statements because expectations are connected to should statements. That they expect something different. They expect something better. They expect something in a different way. And so that's something that we really kind of want to have an ear out for, right? Like, what is it that people say? How do they talk about um, their accomplishments? How do they talk about, you know, being there for others? How do they talk about with, you know, their own selves? So it's really important to think about how do they deem their thoughts? And a lot of times they deem their thoughts to be true. And we also see a lot of negativity. There's a lot of negative self appraisal, which basically means that they have negative views of the self and negative thinking patterns, right? The self is defective. I'm defective. I'm never good enough. If I've reached this goal, not good enough. You know, there's people that are constantly saying, like, I'm not good enough. I've reached this goal. I'm, you know, I got a good grade on this test, but that's not good enough. Now I have to do this. Now I have to do that. And it's just constant berating the self of not being good enough and wanting to be perfect. And so, you know, I come in and shatter the dream and say, you can't be perfect. Only Allah is perfect. And so it's really important, again, like what is this criteria that they've set for themselves that they can't ever attain? They can't ever reach this goal that they've set for themselves. And also we see kind of these very negative thinking patterns. And there's a whole list of cognitive distortions that I will often go through with folks, and we kind of identify the thoughts that they engage in. But what we consistently see is they take the negative and they make it so much bigger than it is. Right? They take their accomplishments and they make it really, really small, and they take their any negative and make it really big. And so at some point, I'm like, look, notice this. Notice how you've flipped this. You've switched it. You know, anything positive that you do, you make it into a tiny little ball, and anything that you do unwell, or it's something that you struggle with, or some one tiny small negative thing, you make it into a big mountain. So something for them to think about, something for you all to think about. So now we're going to switch into another favorite topic of mine, which is emotions and emotion regulation. And the next picture is going to be a little bit jarring, so prepare yourselves. And I'm not trying to scare you or anything, but it's just, you know, it's a comic book character, so I just want you all to be prepared. But I think it'll be interesting to understand the emotional experience of trauma through a narrative, through a story that is connected to American pop culture. But I'm guessing that there may be some of you that are familiar with this character as well. So let's go there. So here we have the Hulk. So he is a comic book character that is very well known, and he's had many, you know, there's lots of comic books around his character, and there's a lot of movies that have come out in recent years. I think I've seen one movie, but I remember, when I was being trained in trauma treatment, we really talked about the Hulk at great length because he really embodies the emotional experience of childhood trauma in general, not just sexual trauma, but childhood trauma in general. And so what we want to do is kind of understand the trauma narrative, the story around the trauma, because the story is what is going to be part of the healing process. So let's understand his story. Well, he was born in a family where there was a lot of domestic violence. His father was very violent, was always beating his mother, and was very abusive towards him as well, often hit him. And so he grew up in this household of a lot of violence, a lot of abuse. And despite all of that, he worked really hard and became, a professor, a biomedical engineer. And, he really kind of worked his way to becoming a very successful person. Well, one day, as he's working in the lab, there was some kind of an accident and he ended up getting some, radiation poisoning, gamma rays or whatever it is. And when that happened, he he was okay. And then all of a sudden, something occurred where he became angry. And what he noticed was the first thing that happened, his eyes changed color. And then his skin changed color. And then he started to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And slowly his cognitive faculties, the way he thought, changed. And rather be this brilliant professor, his talking became very simplistic. Instead of being, speaking clearly the way I'm speaking to you now, he goes, Hulk smash, right? So that's it. It just kind of switched from being this very articulate, smart person to being someone who is very regressed and speaking in a way that is very simple. And when he was fighting law enforcement, right? Like now law enforcement, like, whoa, what do we do with this big guy? Law enforcement's coming after him, right? The military's coming after him with big guns and rockets and everything, and they're shooting at him. Is that calming him down? No. It makes him bigger. And the more they shoot at him, the bigger he gets. And the more they fight with him, the bigger he gets. And it's not until he travels far, far away to South America and lies down on a beach and falls asleep that he's able to calm his body down and return to being himself, Bruce Banner. And his body kind of changes color again. He becomes human and he's calm. And there's another way that he calms down. It's through deep love. He has a love interest. He has this woman that deeply loves him. And when he is really kind of in this activated, intense state of anger and roaring and all of that, that when he sees her and he feels the love he feels for her and the love she gives to him, that also calms him down. So this is the trauma narrative. This is the story of his trauma, that he experienced a traumatic event. And then that gave him the propensity to feel intense anger and feel intense, have this brokenness in him. But then there are ways that it can be managed, right? Through that deep love and to just get away from everybody. So what does this all mean? So we call these people hulked out people who behave like the Hulk. And so what we see is that their amygdala is continuously activated. They act out when they're triggered. So these are people who might get really angry and might yell and might scream and everyone's like, oh, look at them, they're like freaking out. And so people threaten, like, if you keep doing this, I'm gonna leave. And it just makes them angrier. And you can see this in children where you say, they do something in class and then the teacher goes, that's it, you're going to the whatever, you're going to the principal's office, and it just makes them angrier, angrier, angrier. And so at some point we're labeling these people, adults and children, as you're bad, you're an angry child, you're a bad child. But they're really traumatized. The reality is that they're traumatized. So, what are the influences on emotions? Well, for women especially, it's important. For men too, there's issues around testosterone if there's not enough. or if there's too much, it can really influence emotion regulation. But for women in particular, the hormones are really important, especially around the menstrual cycle. So estrogen is really important for the regulation of women's emotions. And right before the period comes, I know might be a little bit um, embarrassing for folks for me to say, but I think it's important for us to explicitly say the effects that emotion, what affects emotions. But right before the actual period comes, there is a low dip in estrogen, and this is when people are the most prone. Most women are the most prone to depression and feeling lower emotions, so feeling a bit more angry, and so if someone already has a trauma vulnerability, this is going to affect them more significantly. So difficulty with emotion regulation is essentially the inability to identify, label, and express emotions effectively. So someone is unable to feel in their body what they're experiencing. They're not able to label the emotion, and they can't express it effectively, because what happens is they go from calm to raging, and they're not able to identify all the other things that they might be feeling prior to that. They might be feeling kind of annoyed, right? Their eyes are changing color, and they're noticing that their skin might start changing color like the Hulk, but they're not able to recognize that. They're already the Hulk. So it's really hard for them to even understand um, to feel safe with these emotions, because what we do as a society is that we label these as bad emotions. And so there's a difficulty they have with recognizing other people's emotions, and they might, if they see someone kind of furrowing their brow, they might get activated, triggered, and have an emotional outburst. So let's go into social effects. I know I'm going a bit slower than I would like, so I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit more quickly so we can get to the healing part. Um, so we see relationships being affected significantly. Um, so we see that there are issues with parents, with being able to feel comforted by parents. There might be resentment with parents. So think about attachment style, right? So if someone's attachment style was secure and then it switched to an insecure attachment style, will they be able to come to their parents for comfort? Will they feel comforted by their parent in that time? Or if they already had an avoidant attachment, if they already had an anxious attachment, then are they going to feel like they're being supported and cared for? Will they feel held? Right? Will they feel like their emotions are contained? Will they feel like someone is holding the emotions with them so that they don't have to feel the intensity of their anger? And there's also, we see a lot of resentment towards parents. Sometimes it's not, it's about, are they believed? Are their parents taking the time to listen to them? Sometimes if one parent is not necessarily sexually assaulting, but is maybe physically assaulting a child, and the other parent is passive, there's resentment towards the passive parent versus the violent parent. So there's a lot of parent dynamics with parents that we see here that are quite important for us to for us to to take note of. We also see a lot of issues within marriages, right? How does this affect marital satisfaction? For some, it can really impact their marriage. It can really kind of be triggering because they're living with, if it's a woman and living with a man for the first time, that can be difficult because it can bring up a lot of difficult memories. And especially, this is the time that people have sex for the first time. And so there's a lot of kind of triggers that come about around that, and being touched, and is there permission sought when they're touched for the first time? Just, I'm not even talking about anything graphic. I'm just saying, like, touching the hand or touching the shoulder, right? So just being mindful of what is the person's experience of just holding hands, right? We're talking about very simple right now. We're not even talking about the graphic, more explicit things. We're talking about a simple holding of the hand. What is that like? So being mindful that this is going to affect marriages, especially around sex, and intimacy, if um, if someone isn't present with their partner, with their wife, with their husband, and able to identify, like, oh, this person had a difficult experience. So let me be more gentle. Let me take my time. Let me hold their hand first. Let them get used to that, and then we can work our way up to more intimate experiences. And even when when the traumatized person has a child, there is a huge risk of re-traumatization. And what I mean by that is that often there are experiences that happen at various ages. And when your child is that age, it can bring about a lot of it can be a trigger. It can bring about a lot of these negative emotions and these negative thinking processes. And it can remind someone of the challenges of their trauma. So something to again to be mindful of that, you know, that the experiences that people have in childhood, especially around sexual abuse, is that these are not just going to go away. So it's like, oh, halas, it's done. You know, we're moving on now. You know, the perpetrator has been put away, and we're not. You know, everything is good. No, 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 everything is not good. You know, they may be locked up. Alhamdulillah, good. You know, that's a great thing. But at the same time, like, how is this person functioning in their day-to-day life with respect to other people in their lives, right? Because we also have to look at how are they functioning in the world? How are they functioning at work? How are they functioning in school? Are they successful? Are they able to feel like they're doing a good thing? How do they behave in family gatherings? Do they feel comfortable? Do they want to isolate? Do they have friends? Sometimes what we see is different selves and in different places. At home, they might be one person. With their friends, they might be a different person. With the work, they're a different person. And it can be very exhausting trying to, you know, kind of be this fractured self where you're a different person in different circumstances. And so we really have to take a look at what does our functioning look like? What does the survivors or the victims functioning look like in public spaces and also private? How are they moving through life? You know, as a result of their traumatic experience. So if someone's not functioning well at work or not functioning well, you know, not getting along with family members and all of that, you know, the first thing we think about is, oh, what's wrong with them? Rather, let's reframe that and say, okay, I know they've had this difficult experience. I wonder if they need help. I wonder if they need to talk to a therapist or a counselor or talk to somebody who's going to help them heal from whatever challenging experiences they've had in their lives. Right? So the framing around this is quite important, that it's not, you know, we don't just write someone off and say, oh, they just have problems. Oh, look at her, she's yelling and screaming again. Rather, what is it that's going on for them that they're struggling? And I've had so many stories of Muslims and non-Muslims who, when their child would cry, would put them in a room and close the door. I'm like, oh, you're crying, just stay in here, and would close the door. And when you're done crying, you can come back out. That is not helpful. That is not healthy. It actually makes things worse. And you know, someone that I worked with for a few years whose parents kept doing this had a really hard time hugging her daughter, had a really hard time showing her daughter affection when her daughter was struggling. You know, and it was the same age that she was when her parents started to lock her up in her room when she would cry. So our work was, okay, you're going to have to tolerate giving her a hug when she's crying and you want to run away. You have to tolerate that because you're a mother now and we don't want to traumatize the next generation. So very important things to think about. And next, we go into the spiritual realm. A lot of times with sexual trauma or any kind of neglect or any kind of trauma in childhood, we see that the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been significantly affected. And there's often a lot of anger towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One thing you have to understand is that often it's not towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Typically, it's towards someone else that should have taken care of them. And we often hear this that, you know, and then as we talk about their relationship with Allah, they start identifying like, well, actually, it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. that I'm mad at, I'm actually angry at my father. He should have protected me. He should have looked out for me. Or my mother. She should have done X or Y or Z, right? So sometimes when, as Muslims, a lot of times what we do is like, so when someone says, I'm mad at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, people just go, oh, astaghfirullah, I can't believe you just said that. Okay, we're not going to freak out about things like this. There's typically a reason why someone's saying something like that. So we ask them, like, where's this coming from? How are you doing in this moment? What is coming up for you in this moment? Around your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because usually it's not about Allah. They're able to say, I know He loves me. I know Allah has a plan in my life. I know, I just feel anger because I wish someone had taken care of me in that moment. I wish someone had known that I was struggling and suffering. So, something to be mindful of, that typically people, when they feel anger towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's actually that they're angry with someone in their own families that they wish had come to their rescue and taken care of them. The other issue is when abuse is connected to religious people and religiosity. So there are many stories of religious people, of teachers, of shuyukh who have engaged in sexual abuse. And so this really affects someone's spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because someone who was supposed to protect and someone who was, has been trained to, within the scope of religion, has violated the rights of a child, of a small, innocent person. Or when religiosity is used as a way to try to control. There are so many stories where parents force their children to study, and if they didn't study the Quran properly, they would get hit. And so then this builds resentment towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and towards religion. And it's not helpful. They're not going to learn the Quran better. They're just doing it out of spite. They're not doing it because they love it. So when abuse is connected to religious people or religiosity, it will impact someone's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so again, if someone is not praying or someone is not reading Quran, we have to stop and think, why is it that this person isn't doing this? Is it because they're, a bad Muslim? Or is it because something has gotten in the way that prevents them from connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Who has gotten in the way of that? And there are cases where, we work on, okay, like you didn't like the way, you didn't like the masjid that you grew up around, but how can you now as an adult control who you seek your knowledge from, and how you seek out knowledge, and how you incorporate Islam into your life? And it really makes a big difference. Right. And so this is where we go into religious coping, that sometimes, reading certain verses of the Quran can be very helpful, doing certain adhkar, doing certain, reading certain, religious texts or listening to certain lectures can be very helpful. And how do we use Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our healing? I once asked the sheikh, I said, I work a lot with, childhood sexual abuse, and is there anything anywhere that gives us an indication as to why this happens? And I really appreciated his answer. He looked at me and he said, I don't know. I don't know. And, it's, if he had given an answer, I think it would have diminished the experience of childhood sexual abuse. And what I mean by that is that if someone tries to explain it, there's going to be blame put somewhere. Someone's, there's going to be some kind of it's just the understanding of it is like, was it meant to be? Was it that Allah wanted this to happen? Like we don't want to go there. We don't know. We don't know what the wisdom is behind, these really challenging experiences happening. So rather than try to explain it, we're going to step away and say, Allahu Alam. And so that has been incredibly helpful for some people when I've shared this, that we're not here to explain why this happened to you. We're here to heal you so that you can function in the world, and that if whatever healing you need to do, that you get to that place and you get there in a safe way. So that's our goal here. We just want people to feel better. And if their goal in life is to be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we make sure that that happens and find those barriers that are getting in the way of them connecting to their Lord. So other major concerns. So if someone is experiencing these symptoms and they're not resolved, we often see other risk factors emerging. We see a lot of depression, we see a lot of anxiety, we see a lot of chronic stress. So, when the amygdala is constantly going, it's activating, the alarm is blaring, right? What happens is that there's increased levels of a hormone called cortisol. And little bits of cortisol is okay, but when you're in chronic stress, there is so much cortisol in the body that it starts affecting the way that our organs are functioning. It affects the way our brain is functioning. And often it changes the chemistry, the metabolism of the body, the chemistry of the body. And often people start to get fat around their belly areas because it just the way that the body metabolizes changes and shifts. And for people who experience intense trauma for years and years and years and years, the system actually flips where the body doesn't deem toxic levels of cortisol to be the same as someone who hasn't experienced a lot of trauma, right? So we all have different thresholds. If it hits the threshold, the body comes in and says, oh, too much cortisol, let's do something to get rid of this. But if someone has been constantly in a state of stress, more cortisol is in their body for a longer period of time before the body comes in and starts regulating the amount of cortisol that is coursing through their veins. And so this is why we need to manage depression, anxiety, chronic stress, domestic violence. And we also see substance use, people drinking alcohol, people smoking marijuana, people doing other types of drugs. And again, we don't go straight to judgment like, astaghfirullah. We say, okay, what is going on? What is leading them to using these substances? There's often addictive behaviors, gambling, sex addiction, porn addiction. That's a huge one. Porn addiction is a very, very big one. In New York, at one point I had 3 or 4 young men who had porn addictions, and all of them had been sexually abused. We often see hypersexuality, eating disorders, psychosis, borderline personality disorder, chronic pain, and dissociative disorders. Borderline personality disorder is a personality type where we see a very disorganized attachment style. They're not able to connect with a lot of their friends and family. Their relationships are very volatile. They do things. They're very dramatic in the way that they do things, and they tend to self-harm a lot. They hurt themselves. They might cut. They might drink a lot of alcohol or do different things. And not all people with borderline personality disorder have been traumatized, but there is a significant portion. And these people tend to often end up alone because they affect their relationships so significantly. So each of these things can significantly affect someone's life. And actually, to go back to psychosis, one of the things that I heard of was, children coming from Syria to Greece, right? So from Syria, they go to Turkey to Greece. There had been a lot of sexual abuse that was happening along the way for them, and because of the intensity of their abuse, they actually developed psychotic symptoms where they were extremely violent, or they were seeing things, hallucinating. So these are very significant consequences of something that shouldn't happen to children. It just shouldn't happen, and unfortunately it does. But these are the major consequences. So let's take a second and say, okay, so those are all the things that happen to children, and things that they're struggling with, and things that they're trying to function in the world with all these different challenges. And so now let's talk about how to heal from these experiences. How do we move through them? How do we work through them? How do we get better? Um, and what we'll start with are what we call evidence-based interventions. So there are different types of um, therapies and intervention, like evidence-based, meaning that they have had studies done. There was a group that didn't receive the treatment, a group that did receive the treatment. The two were compared, and they found that the treatment was highly effective in alleviating distress for a specific group of people experiencing a specific um, type of distress. So the first one is trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy. So this is a type of therapy that has been developed for both children and adults, but it's focused on a specific traumatic experience. And for children, they do require that there are parents involved in the therapeutic process, and it's very specific. I've done brief trainings on this. I'm not fully trained in this. But with the information that I was trained on, you essentially have a very specific a number of sessions, and there are specific things that you do in every session, and they're very structured, um, a very structured way of working through the trauma. But you essentially focus on one specific traumatic event. Cognitive processing therapy is something that is fairly new, and it's something that is done mostly at the VA hospitals, and it is highly effective. There's a lot of processing and retelling the story of a traumatic event, and they might, again, focus on one particular event rather than someone who's experienced multiple events. And what they do is they try to identify stuck points. And what I mean by stuck points, excuse me, is that whenever someone is talking about their traumatic experience, they might think, well, maybe if I hadn't done this, it wouldn't have happened to me. So this is what we would call a stuck point, where we say, okay, well, we have to explore that a little bit more. We have to talk about it a little bit more. We have to kind of pick it apart a little bit more and see, okay, could you have done something different? Because they get stuck in that moment and think, huh, if I had done this, none of this would have happened and I wouldn't have any kind of issue. Um, but at the same time, it's like, well, you couldn't have done anything. You couldn't have predicted. But you can't just tell someone that, right? You can't say, well, it's not your fault. People need to process that, and they need to internalize that, and it needs to be embodied in their system. It's not as simple as saying, just do this. It doesn't work that way. So another evidence-based intervention is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And for this process, it's actually, there's a lot of extra training involved, where there's some kind of a distraction given while the person is talking about their experiences. So there might be eye movement. Sometimes there's tapping that happens. Um, while they're telling the story, so that it kind of brings down their activation as they're telling the story. Um, what I do is more trauma-informed dynamic therapy. We really try to kind of process the experience, but then also looking at kind of a holistic picture, where where I use the way I speak, where I use my own self in the process, and kind of imagine, like, what is it like to feel this way, and then trying to help someone else also identify what their experiences are and how their current functioning is, and kind of help them learn to contain and tolerate their emotions. But it's a very slow process. It requires, if you notice, like, even the way I speak, right? The way that I speak will change. It's less emphatic. It's less intense. It's very soft, and it helps people kind of, contain their emotions and keep the intensity of what they're feeling better managed. Um, So, dialectical behavioral therapy was not developed specifically for trauma. it was developed for people by Marsha Linehan. It was developed for people with borderline personality disorder. But as I just said, there are a lot of people with borderline personality disorder who do experience trauma in childhood. And so one of the things that Marsha Linehan noticed was that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which essentially looks at thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and their connections, wasn't effective for this population. And so what she did is she created these 4 modules in which a person with borderline personality disorder was really struggling. And so what I found is that these modules are also helpful for people with any kind of trauma because, module 1 is mindfulness, right? We talked about how it's really difficult to be in the moment, to be present. So using mindfulness will help someone be in the present. It starts with 30 seconds and then a minute and then 5 minutes and then 10 minutes. So it teaches them to be in the moment. We have emotion regulation, which helps them identify their emotions and then label it and then express it effectively. We have distress tolerance, which allows them to kind of understand these big emotions they're having and then manage them effectively. So knowing that, oh, this is a crisis, I need to use a more intense coping strategy to manage this emotion in this moment without blame, without judgment. And then finally, interpersonal effectiveness, that how are they in their relationships? How are they connecting with the people that they care about and the people that care about them? So it's not indicated specifically for trauma, but it has been highly effective in helping people identify intense emotional experiences and using different techniques to help manage their emotional dysregulation and their improving their relationships. So now I'm going to take what I call a biopsychosocial approach to healing. So all the three different domains that we talked about before, we're going to now talk about again, but within the scope of healing. And so we'll start with the biological, then we'll go to the psychological, and then the social. Okay, so the first thing we talk about is how do we manage this amygdala, right? This amygdala that it's the alarm and it goes off and it's going bah, 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 and the system is just overloaded. How do we manage that? Well, it's very simple actually, right? When the body is activated, when it's in that fight or flight mode, this sympathetic nervous system is activated, and it's activated to the point where every organ in the body is kind of either being shut down or turned on depending on how useful it is in that moment. So like digestion is turned off because we don't need to digest anything in that moment, but then heart rate is up and lung capacity improves. So what we want to do in that moment is activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And the way that we do that is by deep diaphragmatic breathing. So you take a breath in, and then you take the breath out through your nose, and you try to elongate your exhale. So in, and then out 5. And you're just exhaling and extending your exhale until you empty out your lungs. So you take in a count of 3, 1, 2, 3, and then exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what this does, right? And you're focusing on the breath. You're not focusing on, oh, I have to cook something. No. Focus on the breath. And what that does is it activates the parasympathetic nervous system and it calms the body down. It works. I guarantee you it works. Everyone is like, this doesn't work. I'm like, could you try it? Let's try it together. And so we try these techniques together, and then eventually people say, okay, I think it works. I will try it. The other thing that we use is we use distraction or grounding. And the reason we use distraction and grounding is because we can't use a coping strategy quite yet. We can't say, okay, well, let's go for a walk. Let's think about it. Let's sit with the emotion. We can't do that quite yet because the physiological distress is so intense that it's really difficult to be in the moment with the emotions or with the physiological symptoms. So a distraction can be, okay, I'm just going to call up my friend and just talk about something totally unrelated. And some people watch, a short video on YouTube or on TV. Some people might play with their children. Some people might go cook something, right? Something that is going to distract you from the intensity of what you're experiencing. Grounding there's different ways of grounding. The first is just listing things off, right? I work with someone who is European and she really liked field hockey. So she would name field hockey players. You can name your top 5 favorite songs. You can name your top 5 favorite TV shows. It doesn't matter. It's, you know, insignificant, quick things that you're going to be able to rattle off, say one after the other, so that it turns your attention from, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't handle life, to, okay, green, blue, purple, orange, right? Just going through a list. It can be colors like I just did. It can be, looking around your room and just naming things. There's a picture on the wall. There's a lamp next to me. There's a computer screen. I have a blue cup next to me. It can just be naming things non-judgmentally. Very simple. Very simple. And sometimes people make safety statements. My name is Venus. I'm sitting in my apartment in New York City. I am safe. I'm with, I'm sitting in front of my computer. I'm okay right now. It can be as simple as that. The other thing is to help someone move through their physical discomfort. That, yeah, it is uncomfortable to be in a state of physiological activation. And you can handle it. You can move through it, right? By just saying, like, okay, just take the deep breath. You can get through this, and giving themselves positive feedback that you can do this, keep trying, right? Sometimes, putting your hands in warm water might be helpful, and cold water might be helpful. Making wudu can be helpful, right? But it's about moving through. It's not about get over it. It's about moving through. So what about healing thoughts? Well, we first try to identify the thoughts, right, that are connected to the situation, right? Professor gave someone feedback. They got, they didn't get the grade that they wanted. Oh, I am a terrible person, right? So the thought is, I'm a terrible person. So then we say, well, what's the source of these thoughts? Where is this coming from? Is this coming from, is it true? Is it partially true? We try to understand, like, where is this coming from? Well, we know that it's not 100% true. Maybe on this assignment you weren't a good student, but in general, if you're a good student and something got in the way of you being able to do well, is this a true thought? Not 100%. Is it a distortion? Yes, it's a distortion. So then what we try to do is reframe that thought and say, okay, this is a negative, this is a cognitive distortion. There are times that I'm a really good student and I work really hard, but in this instance, I could have worked a little bit harder. I could have done a little bit better, right? So we challenge thoughts. I'm the worst person in the world. Is that true? You're not the worst person. I mean, Firaun was a really bad person. Like, he didn't even make Toba. Like, he was a bad person. But are you a bad person? Really? Like, think about that. Challenge that thought. And then we try to find those stuck points that I discussed earlier. Like, what are those that I should have known better? I shouldn't have done this. Okay, well, tell me, what could you have done differently? What is it that you wanted to do versus what is it that you actually did? So these are some ways that we try to work through thoughts. And we try to help someone first and foremost identify thoughts. And then once they identify, we try to label what kind of a thought it is. And then we try to reframe the thought and come up with an alternative. And sometimes we just straight up challenge the thought, like, I don't know if that's true. Let's come up with a different example. What's a different way you could say that? And then we try to find those stuck points. So with respect to emotion regulation, we really want to think about, again, the example of the Hulk, right? So with respect to the Hulk, right? Once the Hulk is out, once the full Hulk has happened, the color has changed and he's grown into this big monster, right? There's nothing much that we can do. So the first thing we want to be able to do is to say, okay, we are going to try our best not to let the Hulk out in the first place. We're going to try to recognize the triggers of our anger and of not being able to manage emotions, like emotions that are difficult for us, whether it's fear or anger or anxiety. We're going to try to understand the things that will cause us to feel this way. Because if we start identifying these things, we can pick up on, when do our eyes change color? When does our skin start changing color? And kind of pick it up right from that moment and not let it get to full big Hulk with like no no ability to manage. Because once the Hulk is in and the amygdala has activated the sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline is coursing through the veins. And once adrenaline's coursing through the veins, you need like 45 minutes to an hour to let that calm down. And so if you know that someone is dysregulated or you have recognized that you're dysregulated, it's better to go into a different space and just spend that space away from everyone else to let your body calm down and come back to its regular kind of experience, its regular kind of feelings. And then you can kind of think and say, oh, what was going on? What happened? Like, why did I, feel this way in that moment? What came up for me? But we often in therapy really try to figure out, like, what are the triggers? What are the early signs of anger? What are what is frustrating this person? What does their anger feel like in their body? So that when they feel the anger, they're able to recognize it early enough to help cope with it and manage it, right? The eyes turn green. Oh, okay, I'm feeling angry right now in this moment. Okay, what do I do? Okay, now I'm going to engage in some kind of a coping strategy. And I often share it with people, like when I feel anger, I feel like this heat going from my neck into my face, like when I feel really angry at something. So we all as people have to be able to understand, what does our anger feel like? What does our happiness feel like? What does our anxiety feel like? I once I had to sign up for my licensing exam, and the moment I put in my credit card information into the computer, my heart rate just went up. I was like, oh, that made me anxious, right? Because I was in the moment and I was able to recognize that. And so that's what we teach people, is how to be in the moment and how to recognize what their bodies are telling them, right? So the mind and the body are connected so it can be recognized. When the mind and the body are disconnected, you go from 0 to being calm and nothing to 100, and now you're the Hulk, right? And once you're the Hulk, you just got to go into a different space and just let your body, let the adrenaline take its course, and then calm the body down. And most of all, this it's going to be really important to focus on what's the most important: love. And we know that as Muslims, the two entities that are the most important in our lives are Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We know that Allah loves us. We know that He loves us. And we know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loves us. And so if you're someone who really truly embodies this and believes this, then you know that even if everybody else in your family is difficult and challenging and isn't supportive and isn't helpful, then you can at least find comfort in the fact that Allah loves you no matter what you do. And that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loves you so much that he would sit up at night thinking of you and making sure you're okay and praying for you. So think about what is love. One of my teachers once said that the heart that is in distress and the heart that is broken is a heart to give to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I just, like, that is something that has stuck with me for many, many years, and I think is so important for us to remember in moments of struggle and distress, especially if it's something very meaningful to us as Muslims. But also, there are people in our vicinity, there are people around us, whether it's a friend, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a parent, whether it's a child, that love us deeply. And a lot of times, I work a lot with mothers, and a lot of times they think of their children. They're like, my husband is not helpful, my parents are not helpful, but I love my daughter so much and I want to make sure that I provide, that I take care of myself for her sake, because everybody else is very difficult to deal with. So focus on what matters most, love. And how do we improve interpersonal relationships? Well, first we got to build trust. Believe yourself. If something has happened to you, believe yourself. Make sure you believe yourself. And if you're someone who is with someone who has experienced child sexual abuse, believe them. Make them feel like they're not crazy and that they're not just a dramatic person. They experience something very, very terrible and they need to be believed. Even if you're like, I don't know, believe them. They're telling you something that is really hard for them to share. So believe them. Be attuned when you're around people like this who are struggling and in distress. Watch what they're doing. Listen to them actively. Watch their movements and identify what are the struggles they're experiencing. A lot of my work is just attunement. I just sit there and I listen. And so sometimes you see people kind of moving around and shuffling in their seat. And I'm like, what's going on in this moment? How are you feeling? Is this uncomfortable for you? And they'll say, yeah, I'm really uncomfortable. This is, this is not comfortable for me. So we try to label emotions, for others. We try to help them understand what they are experiencing. Sometimes it's really hard especially for children, it's really hard for them to identify their emotions. So with small children who are survivors of sexual abuse, I actually say, like, you are feeling angry in this moment, and it's not related to the trauma. He just got upset because his brother, wouldn't share the toys with him. So we can we have to be mindful of that. And also, don't push people to speak about the trauma, and don't push yourself to speak about your trauma. Make sure that you're creating a safe space. And what I mean by safe space is creating an environment that allows someone to feel comfortable to share with you. Okay? If someone doesn't feel safe, we shouldn't force them to tell us what they're feeling and thinking and experiencing. We really have to be mindful of that. And that's what I really try to create in my work, in my office, that you can come in here and tell me anything and everything, and I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to say, astaghfirullah, I can't believe that you said that, or I can't believe that happened to you. How could you let? No, it's not helpful. Not helpful. We don't do that. Okay. So what about attachment, right? We talked about earned security, and we talked about it within the scope of what happens when someone is secure, then they have an insecure attachment. How do we get them to earn security? And then someone who maybe grew up with an insecure attachment and getting them to earn security. Well, the first thing is that we need to have what we call reflective capacity. So what's going to happen is that you have to be able to imagine what it is that the other person is experiencing. And so when you're able to imagine what they're experiencing, you're able to mentalize their experience. Then we try to verbalize what they're experiencing, right? So we say, this is what's going on for you right now. You have to have self-awareness of yourself, and the other person you're trying to help and support has to have self-awareness, right? So we try to see people and we try to know them. We try to really understand them and see what their experience is about. And typically when someone is going through this experience, they feel cared for, they feel seen, because you're able to say, oh, you're feeling this. Is that true? Or you're experiencing this. Is that true? And that's when someone feels like, okay, this person gets what I'm experiencing. So this is a quote from the movie Moana. If you've seen the movie, wonderful, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't, it's okay. But these lines were really, really powerful for me when I heard them. It's really her seeing someone who everybody else wasn't seeing, right? So she says, I have crossed the horizon to find you. I know your name. They have stolen the heart from inside you, but this does not define you. This is not who you are. You know who you are. And what's so powerful about these words is that this person, this entity was traumatized. And all of a sudden, they were this big monster, brr, like screaming, yelling, right, being very violent. And she was able to see beyond that. She was able to see, wait a minute, I know who you are. This isn't who you are. Your behavior, this is not who you really are. Rather, you know who you are. It's deep inside of you. And so this is what, right? This is what seeing is about. So if you're into movies and you're okay with watching them, I would recommend watching this movie because it will help you understand how to make sure others feel seen. And our final slide is on some important considerations. Make sure to build trust with parents, therapists, loved ones. Try to build trust. It's really hard to build trust after such a big violation, but try. You know, we're here to support you and help you. We try to redefine good enough. That how can we create a definition for good enough that will allow you to feel like, okay, I'm not perfect, I can't be perfect, but I'm good enough. Next, we have this concept of moving through. We need to help people move through their experiences at the pace that they're able to and not push them more than what they can handle. We provide a lot of psychoeducation. All the different things that we cover today, these are all the things I discuss with people that I work with. We talk about all of this. We teach people to trust themselves. We build attunement not only from the therapist to the patient, but for the patient to have attunement to their own needs and also build attunement for other people. If they're present, then they'll be able to show attunement to their partner, to their husband, to their wife. And also be kind. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others. This will take time. It will take a little bit of time. But inshallah, with khair, people do get better. And with the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, that is the end of my presentation. Jazakumullah khair. So I'll stop here.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Venus. This was such a beneficial and enlightening talk. Jazakallah khair for all of your time and explanation with this. So what we are going to do is take a Maghrib break. It is Maghrib Adhan in Pakistan right now. So we'll take a Maghrib break and then inshallah we'll just try to come back after Maghrib prayer, and we have questions and questions from the different participants for the different speakers as well. So we'll try to get through those in that time. So we'll go on our break right now for prayer, another 10 minutes. So we'll join in exactly 10 minutes when it's 20 minutes past the hour, inshallah. Jazakallah khair everyone for your patience and continuing to stay on. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. We are going to go ahead and restart after our Maghrib prayer break. And because of our time today and also because of the internet issues that are going on in Pakistan at the moment, we are going to have our time specifically with Dr. Venus Mahmoodi to give the answers to the questions that many of you have asked in the comment section, as well as in the registration forms. We received many relevant questions, alhamdulillah. So we'll try to make use of our expert who's with us here today, inshallah, of her time to be able to answer these questions. So we'll go ahead and start. I hope all of you are joining back now, inshallah, after the prayer break. And we'll go ahead and start with the first question that actually a very similar question has been asked by several people. So I'll read the question as well as the other ones that are relevant. How does one forgive the caregivers when you have a strained relationship with them, and also when they trigger you by being close to or engaging with the relatives or the family if the abuser? And we had some other questions that were sort of similar regarding how to recover from negative thoughts and past traumas when you're continuously being criticized by parents, or how can you talk to your parents about the abuse, once they've hurt you so badly, things like that. So if you could shed some light on this, Dr. Venus.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes, I think the most challenging thing is when you're connected to the abusers or the people who are the perpetrators of the abuse, whether it's your own family or a close connection to the family. As far as forgiveness, it takes time for forgiveness. I mean, ultimately, if that's the goal, then be mindful that it takes a long time to get to that place, and that as Muslims, I know that is something that's really important for us to consider. Especially because we're trying to attain Jannah, and we want to make sure that we're not harboring ill will towards others and all of that. And I wholeheartedly understand that. But also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very merciful. I mean, he's more merciful than we can even imagine. So we also have to think about what the process is for us to get to that place of being able to forgive people, whether it's a perpetrator, whether it's family members, whether it's people, the closest people to us, our parents. We have to be mindful that this is a process. This is not something that is all or nothing. Either I forgive them and I'm a good person, or I'm a bad person and I don't forgive. That's not how we see things. We see things as a process. And that's something that in our deen is also very well established, that we see things as a process, that even hardships and difficulties that we experience are a process. And it's not either you're good or you're bad, or you're a good Muslim or a bad Muslim. So we have to remember that. As far as dealing with criticism and dealing with the challenges of or family members still engaging with abusers, behaviors or things that are detrimental to our well-being, there are things that we have to think about. Almost every answer that a psychologist will give will start with "it depends." And I begin with that as well. It depends on the circumstances, on your individual situation. So if it's possible to set boundaries, then I urge you to work with someone to help figure out what those boundaries will look like for you. Because if your family is socializing with the abuser, then it is going to be emotionally and physically unsafe for you. So how do you kind of set a boundary with your own family, so that you are going to be in the safest possible environment? The thing is, I can't tell you exactly what to do, because I don't know you. I don't know your exact circumstances. I don't know how to help and support you in figuring that out. But this is where I would encourage you to talk to somebody to help you figure that out. Because building boundaries and creating boundaries is going to be important, because it will clarify for everyone that I'm willing to do this, but I'm not willing to do this. I'm willing to engage with my parents or people that are important to me, but I'm not going to engage with the family of the abuser, or deal with the abuser himself. I'm not, or her, whatever. I'm not going to deal with them. And this is something that you have to figure out for yourself what those boundaries look like. Because again, these are triggers, these are major triggers. The other thing is, we really have to build tolerance around the discomfort of setting up boundaries with people. It is going to be uncomfortable. And a lot of times people bring in religion and say, but Jannah is under my feet and you must listen to me or else. Yeah, but not having someone do something that is detrimental to their well-being and to their functioning in the world. And that is something, again, it's important for, I can't give, the whole, I can't give an answer that is going to encompass your specific experience because I don't know you well enough to be able to do that. But I will end with this part, that we really have to frame things as for now. That when you're able to see your experience as a process, you will be able to see it as like, this is how it is for now. It's not going to be like this forever, but it is like this for now. And that you will go through this experience with trying different things until something works effectively. So you try to set a boundary and everybody gets upset at you. Okay, they get upset. What else are you going to try? And then what are you going to try? And then what are you going to try? Because you can't figure out the right answer the first time, right? It takes a few iterations, a few tries before you get to what is going to work for you. But if it's, I'm also very mindful of not saying like, well, just move out of your home, just isolate yourself, go away, because I know that that's not the solution for everybody. For some people, it might be an option where they're able to move away from their families, but for some, they have to stay within their house, their family's household. So if it's the case that you have to stay, you have to think about what can make this experience tolerable for now until you're able to move through the experience, or you get there is some kind of additional help or support provided, or you're able to move away, or some other thing happens. But again, what is it that you can do to make it tolerable for now, so you can at least protect yourself emotionally?
Jazakallah khair for that very beneficial response, comprehensive response to these questions. I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps to bring some benefit and some comfort to those who are asking this question.
Ameen. Ameen.
The next question that we had from one of the participants is, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put this pain or experience in my story? How can someone who loves you make you go through these painful experiences?
SubhanAllah. Yeah, I mean, we briefly discussed this, and it's something I did ask one of the shuyukh here in New York, to understand, what is the purpose of going through something like this, right? And especially when you're a child, like how is it that a child goes through this? And the thing is that, we answer the question with Allahu alam. I don't know. We don't know. We know there's some understanding around this, but we don't have the knowledge right now in this dunya to understand, and understand it well. And I'm not even going to say why, because I don't know, right? Is there a reason for it? Is there a purpose for it? We don't know. So this is where we ask Allah to move us through our pain and to help us get to a point in which we are healing and functional in the world, and everything will be clear in the akhirah. Everything on the day of judgment, everything will be clear, and you will understand everything about your experiences, why it happened, how it happened, all of that. And for now, I think it is better for us not to know, because then we can't put any blame on ourselves, because you're not to blame. It's not your fault. And so maybe right now it is good not to know the exact reason, because maybe it would be a way for you to blame yourself. And in the akhirah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will clarify and let us know everything that we need to know about everything. And I hope that gives you some level of comfort in some way, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. I think it's a beautiful perspective as well, and it ties into what you said earlier about for now, right?
Yeah.
It's very similar to that. Jazakallah khair. So switching gears a little bit, we had another question early on that about suggesting some books for adult survivors of child sexual abuse to read and gain insights.
I don't have any specific books on childhood sexual abuse, but what I would recommend is the book by Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, and also the book by I think it's called The Polyvagal Theory by Stephen Porges. My former supervisor, the person who trained me, was also trained by Bessel van der Kolk, and his name is Jacob Ham, but spelled Ham. So you can also, he has a lot of YouTube videos and he has a website, and he writes a lot about his techniques and his way of addressing specifically attachment-based trauma, which includes sexual assault and sexual abuse. So I would recommend looking at his website and his YouTube videos. He has a lot of videos on attachment styles and healing through trauma through using the attachment process. So if you're someone who is interested in learning more about that, I would recommend him as a resource as well.
Jazakallah khair. Could you say that name one more time? I can write it in the chat box for them.
Sure. Jacob Ham. It's pronounced Ham, but spelled like ham.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. The next question is, how do you handle the stress and trust issues as a mother who was a victim of child sexual abuse? I think you mentioned that it can be re-traumatizing, but do you have tips on how to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, parenting can be exceptionally difficult when you have experienced childhood sexual trauma. So what's important is that you need to do the work to take care of yourself and to manage your emotions effectively. Because depending on the age of your child or children, they may need you to help regulate their emotions, especially if they're, under 10. They really need a lot of help with regulating their own emotions. So if you're having difficulty managing your distress, managing stress, trusting yourself, trusting others, then it is going to be a lot harder to contain their emotions and help them. So what I would suggest is first starting with getting some kind of therapy for yourself so that you can learn how to manage your emotions and manage stress effectively, and building trust and learning, how to move through your experiences, because that will make you someone who is going to be attuned not only to your own distress and meeting your own needs, but then also being able to meet the needs of your children. And that's, it's the hardest thing, to be attuned to yourself while also trying to take care of your children. I know it's very difficult, and especially when they're young, it's, you're trying to be, a good parent, and you're trying to contain their emotions. But if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of them effectively. But what I would suggest, is think about your kind of basic self-care needs. Are you eating adequately? Are you sleeping adequately? Are you drinking enough water on a day-to-day basis, right? These are very basic needs. And when you have these basic needs met, it will help with handling stress. And it's also about the framing that if I take care of myself, and manage my stress, I will also be able to take care of them and their stress. So that's, I know I hope it's, a little bit of help for you. I know it's not much, but, we at least have to start with managing our emotions, dealing with our stress so that we can take care of them. And I hope some of the things we discussed in the presentation will be helpful to you.
Jazakallah khair for that very important point about both the mother, the mother also needs to get therapy and find ways to regulate those emotions. Jazakallah khair. Okay, the next question is, I want to know how repression works. I think she's talking about the child who's experienced abuse, if they change their story or recant their story. How can I help my daughter heal while not reinforcing these events in her memory?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times the memory is really all over the place with children and sexual abuse or any kind of abuse. Sometimes they remember something, sometimes they don't remember things. There's, their memory's very spotty. So it's not about the abuse. Making sure they're safe. So if the abuser is present, making sure they're safe from the abuser. All of those things, of course. But it's you don't have to make it about the abuse and discuss like, okay, are there, if I talk about this, will this bring up memories and all of that? I think what's more important for you to consider is how she's functioning in the moment. So I worked with a 4-year-old boy, and he couldn't remember anything that happened to him, and his grandparents would constantly ask me like, "What happened to him? Tell me what happened to him." I'm like, "I don't know. He can't remember. He was too young." And frankly, it doesn't matter. He's safe now because he's living with his grandparents rather than with the people that abused him. So the actual events don't matter. What does matter is the fact that when he would get angry, he would throw things. I don't know if you're familiar with Legos, but he would just be throwing these little pieces just all over the office when he would get angry. And so that's what we would work with, is helping him regulate his emotions in the moment, right? The Hulk would come out and I'd be like, okay, I know you're upset, you're feeling angry right now, and helping him kind of bring down his activation and turning off his amygdala so that he could come back and start playing again. And so that I think is more important about how is she functioning in this moment? What are the things she's struggling with? Is she struggling with, anger? Is she struggling with negative thoughts? Is she struggling with not getting along with her playmates? What are the specific things she's struggling with? And focusing more on that rather than thinking about, is this really true, did this really happen? I think you should go with the assumption that it did happen, and that given that it happened, how is she functioning in the moment? If she's okay, she's okay, alhamdulillah. But she will have moments where the emotions might get really intense. So you provide that safe environment that allows her to show her anger, and then you teach her how to regulate it, because that's what happened with my patient. He would express his he was very friendly, he was too friendly. And so there were moments where he would be fine, many moments he would be fine, but then once in a while he would just get so angry and he would start throwing things, and we would work on that in that moment. But his brother was the complete opposite. His brother was having tantrums every single day. Every single time my colleague would see him, he would have a tantrum. And she was really frustrated. She was like, "I don't know, he's always angry, he's always upset." But that was her work with him, was to help regulate his emotions every single time she saw him. So that's, it's not about, I don't think you would be doing anything to reinforce her memory. I don't think you would be solidifying in any way. I don't think it's necessary to talk about like what happened to her and how it happened. I think it's more important for her to feel safe in the environment that you create for her at home. I think that's more significant.
Jazakallah khair for that very clear answer. I think it's also interesting how you mentioned that there's different responses to trauma even among siblings, right? Maybe even the same trauma, and they can come out in very different ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. We often see either children being too friendly with strangers and with anybody and everybody, or we see the complete opposite, where they're always in the state of dysregulation. And so it was really interesting putting them together sometimes and having them play, because the dysregulation would come out in very different ways between the two of them. And so, then my colleague and I would take a concerted effort, and both of us working on helping them regulate with one another while they're playing. So yeah, I think it's really important to see like, how does it manifest within each person. It's going to be different.
Jazakallah khair. Okay, so the next question is there a way to determine if your child has suffered from abuse but is refraining from talking about it? And there were several questions like this actually in our registration forms. How do you get a shy child to tell that they're being abused? Things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard if they're not willing to talk about it. But you know, as a parent, it's going to be on you to create a safe environment, and that doesn't mean that just because you create a safe environment, they're going to start telling you things. It just means that they feel safe enough with you, and that if la qadrallah, there has been something that happened, they will be able to share with you at some point. But the main thing is that you're trying to, you know, when what I mean by safe environment, it's that, you know, if they're angry, you contain and hold the emotion. You let them be angry. You label it like, yeah, you're feeling really angry right now, right? Sometimes kids, when they're mad, they start hitting. You be like, it's not okay to hit, and it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel your anger right now. Let's punch a pillow. Let's you know color with a marker. Let's do so, you know, help them regulate their emotions in the moment or whatever it is that they're struggling from. But the thing is that, you know, sometimes there's behavioral things that you might notice. Sometimes children like start wetting their beds out of nowhere. Sometimes they're like they get angry really quickly. Sometimes they you know, you just see kind of like major shifts in their behavior. They might not eat as much. They might eat more. They might gain a lot of weight. They might, you know, not play with certain friends anymore. So you'll see some, if as a parent you're attuned, which means that you notice things and you notice that they're behaving more different than they differently than how they typically behave, then that's an indication for you to be like, there might be something going on. We don't know, but there might be something going on. And so again, you know, you can ask them questions and you can also speak about it in generalities. So, you know, with my child, sometimes what I do is I talk about like, you know, only you know, mommy can change your clothes or give you a bath. Only mommy, okay? Nobody else can, okay? But if you know, if you're with somebody else and they ask you, you're going to tell mommy, right? So what we do is we try to kind of like we just speak about it, and she's a shy one. I mean, I can tell you, she's one of the shyest ones, and you know, she will not talk if she doesn't know you or like you or you know, she's very specific about who she talks to. And but we still talk about consent. We still talk about like it's not okay for you to change your clothes in front of other people. It's not okay for you to mommy can do that with you. Mommy can do that or do this. Um, and so the more you talk about it, then eventually they'll say, they'll feel like they can say something to you, but don't push them, don't pressure them. There's no timeline. There isn't like they have to tell you by the end of the week. Like, no, create that safe space and develop attunement around your child's behavior. And what I mean by attunement is watch them, listen to them. Are you noticing differences in their behavior? Are you noticing, you know, if a child doesn't feel seen, if they don't feel like their parent is present and cares about them, they're not gonna tell you anything. Or they're afraid, not because you're a bad parent, not because you're not attuned, because they don't want to share. So what you wanna do is consistently provide them with that secure base, that secure attachment, right? Anytime they're in distress, hug them and kiss them and give them lots of love. If they push away, is that normal? Is it normal for them to push away when you're trying to hug them and kiss them? And then you can ask them, "Oh, what's going on in this moment for you? Well, no, you pushed me away. You don't push me away typically. What's going on?" If they tell you, great. If not, be like, "That's okay. You don't have to tell me right now. We can try another time." So be mindful about how you ask, how you push them. Don't push them, that's my advice. Um, but you know, create that secure base for them, create that space for them so that when they are ready, they can tell you if something has happened. If it hasn't happened, then you know, then you're fine. But you know, there's no way of knowing specifically unless there are like actual you know, significant signs. So yeah.
Jazakallah khair. So I think, yeah, it's a really important perspective. Someone commented also that, you know, it's a more what you said about it's more important to make them feel safe and secure than to ask the details of what happened to them. So I
Yeah.
think that's a great summary of it. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
And we have 2 more questions for you, inshallah. What would be your one piece of advice to mental health professionals treating childhood trauma cases? I know it's a very probably difficult question.
No, it's yeah, in a way it is, but in a way it isn't. I would say be in the moment, be present, listen, and be attuned. And just like a parent has to be attuned to their child, a therapist has to be attuned to their patient. Be in the moment with them. Try to work hard, really hard to build that trust. Because when you see kind of the struggle and you move past the struggle and you really see who's in front of you, then that's when you build trust, and then you can like become the source of hope for someone who's really struggling. And once you become that source of hope for them, then that's when their healing starts. So, you know, I again, attunement, seeing them, really knowing them, and helping them move through the experience non-judgmentally. You know, sometimes people tell you things that, you know, they feel really ashamed about, and it's okay. It's okay that they experience that thing, even if it's something that's haram and you're like, "Oh, astaghfirullah." No, it happened. It happened, and they wanna share their experiences with someone, and you're gonna be that person that they share that with. So, create that safe space, be the container, hold the emotions, and frankly, take care of yourself so that you can be that container. Just like I mentioned for the mom earlier, that we as providers have to be taking care of ourselves, you know, taking care of our basic needs so that we can hold others' emotions for them. And until they're ready to hold their own emotions. And then we can kind of hand it over and say, okay, you got this, you can do this, you can take care of yourself now. So that's what I would say.
Jazakallah khair. It's a very, very profound advice for the mental health professionals who are listening as well. All right. And another question that came in our registration forms is, how do you know when you are healed?
Yeah, this is a good one. Um, it's a good one because it's a hard one. And once again, as a psychologist, I say it depends. You know, healing's going to look different for different people, and movement through your process is going to be different. And sometimes we go very, 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 very slowly, and sometimes we go really, really fast. But typically, what I um, what I like to hear is how people talk about their story. So the thing that I think that I didn't mention with earned security is the story that someone how someone talks about their trauma. So, for example, when initially someone starts talking about their trauma, they say, "This happened to me. I can't believe it happened to me. What's wrong with me? Why didn't I do something? Why didn't my parents come and save me? What's wrong with it?" Right? There's this very negative, kind of very kind of negative tone to the way that people are talking about it. And the story is just very disjointed. You might hear a little bit from the beginning and then you'll hear a little bit from the end. It's kind of like all over the place. But what happens is that as we go through therapy and we move through the experience and we discuss all the different aspects and we process the emotions and we process the stuck points and kind of understand everything and why things happened the way they did and how you reacted to them and all of those different things, this very coherent narrative starts forming. And what I start hearing is that, you know, I don't understand fully 100% why this happened to me, and I'm able to function well enough now and move through my experience well enough. And they will use these words. You know, I'm able to handle a lot more than I was. I'm more productive. I'm able to do the things that I'm able to do. And so I feel okay. I'm not over everything. I'm not over the abuse. I'm not ready to just for, you know, never think about it again. But I'm in a place where I feel okay right now, and I'm able to do the things I wanna do. And so when we start hearing the narrative shift in that way, I start thinking, "Okay, I think this person is in a place where they've healed enough, right? Not 100% healed. I don't think we ever heal 100% from any kind of significant trauma in our lives, but we are healed enough that we're able to make meaning out of the experience, that okay, it happened and it was really difficult and challenging to experience it and to move through the healing part, and now I'm able to, function and work and do the things that I want to do in my life. And some people, connect to the work and do things around their experience to prevent it from happening with others. Many of you have joined in today to understand and what healing looks like and how to maybe use this for yourselves or disseminate it for other people. So we try to make meaning out of all the different experiences we've had. And so when someone has been healed enough, they're able to find that meaning in their life, and be able to experience life in a more balanced way. And again, we're not seeking perfection, that now I'm better and I'm never going to think about it again. No, that's not going to be the case. It is part of your experience in life. And so the way that you see it and the narrative that's created around it is going to be a lot more significant than anything else. So I would say once the story becomes more coherent and more balanced, that's when I think you'll know that you're healed enough.
Wow, Jazakallah khair. I think all those points were so important for everyone to understand the concepts of, not just you can't just get over it and you're moving through it, and really that requirement for processing. I think something else I've heard you say is that aspect of, just because someone is able to function normally doesn't necessarily mean they're healed. Those are sort of different things. So Jazakallah khair for explaining that so well. All right, Alhamdulillah. I think those are all the questions that we've gotten through. I know the audience is really interacting with it well, Alhamdulillah, in the comment section. Jazakallah khair for all of you there. So what I really want to thank Dr. Venus for her time today and really explaining it in such a clear and meaningful way for all of us. I really personally learned a lot, and I think a lot of people have benefited from this, alhamdulillah.
Well, Jazakumullah khair for having me. I really, I hope this was of benefit for everyone, and that it's, kind of a stepping stone to move everyone towards healing.
Inshallah. So what I'm gonna do, I know we had sort of said that we would have a question and answer for the other speakers as well for Ustaza Aisha Khatak, but due to various technological issues that are going on right now, we're not going to be able to do that. So the questions that she was supposed to answer, we are probably going to share them with you in the form of videos, or we'll contact you as well about that. But just before we end, I want to all introduce you to SOS. I promised you all that we are going to be sharing about what this group or new project is going to be doing, inshallah, at the end of this workshop. And this is a project of Ustaza Aisha Khatak, and the project is SOS, standing for speaking, opening, and sharing, and ultimately the goal being healing together. And through this project, we're aiming to have support groups in the community specifically for people who have been affected by different issues. So one of the support groups will be for victims of child sexual abuse, other types of sexual abuse as well, and really to provide that sense of community and provide that sense of support and comfort for one another, that you're not alone, and there are other people who have gone through this, but in a way that finding other people who maybe have gone through that processing and that healing, and knowing that okay, this is possible, and finding that hope together through sharing their stories. in a beneficial way, inshallah. And we will be having several of our psychotherapists and other people who are trained in those sessions at that time, so it's a very controlled and beneficial environment as well. So that's something that we're very, very excited to share with you and to announce that is going to be starting soon, inshallah. We are just arranging the times and how those sessions are going to work. So please watch out for that on the social media platforms of us announcing that and getting a group together for those. There will be other topics as well that will be discussed, specific support groups, for example, for people who have gone through other kinds of traumas or other kinds of difficulties in their life, whether that might be for divorced sisters or for widowed sisters or those who are trying to get married. So all kinds of those support groups, because really I think we found that many of us, many people feel alone in those situations because there's so much stigma in the community to address them. And so really finding a way to build supportive, comforting communities around them is what the goal of SOS will be, inshallah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless this and to put barakah in it and to make this project a means of healing and benefit for the ummah, inshallah. Ameen. And so with that, I want to just get to some final reflections and thoughts. Alhamdulillah, as we wrap up this 3-part workshop, and we're so thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing us to do this and giving us this opportunity, and for all of you who have joined us. It's really humbling and just honestly such a moment to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing us to do this and for making this a reality. We were able to have, 3 different unique and important perspectives on this issue. We started off with the public health perspective, and then we went into, the legal Islamic Sharia perspective, and then alhamdulillah today we finished with that therapy psychology perspective, and really recognizing that this issue requires that kind of multi-perspective lens in order to solve it, right? It requires many different fields and a cooperation with all these different fields, and a cooperation of community members and parents and teachers and educators and all kinds of fields to really help to stop this issue, to prevent the issue from happening in the future, and to really provide support and healing to those who have been affected by it. And so, I think through these workshop series, we've been able to reach our goal of, the first step of providing some kind of awareness and some kind of education that's out there. And then now there's many more steps, inshallah, that we need to follow this up with if we're going to be working to address this issue in our community. But I think that these 3 perspectives, and of course there's probably even more perspectives, but that really gives you a holistic view of this topic, and recognizing that any topic that we're addressing, especially something so difficult and so stigmatizing as child sexual abuse, it can't just be approached and addressed and tackled from one side. It really needs a holistic approach to it from many different sides. And not to drag on too long, inshallah, but I did promise you at the beginning of these 3 sessions that I would come back to this passage in Surah Taha that we started off these workshops with. And I sort of said at the beginning that we're going to reflect on this passage, and at the end I'll sort of explain my own personal reflections on this. This is not a tafsir of it, but just my personal reflections on this passage. So we'll take, a couple minutes to sort of end with this recitation of Surah Taha, and then I'll share my personal reflections, and we'll end it with that, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى قال رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي واجعل لي وزيرا من أهلي هارون أخي أشدد به أزري وأشركه في أمري كي نسبحك كثيرا ونذكرك كثيرا إنك كنت بنا بصيرا قال قد أوتيت سؤلك يا موسى.
Subhanallah, I realized I was muted, so I will re-explain, inshallah, the reflections that I wanted to share. So, I wanted to share these reflections as a personal reflection that has really touched me. That, in this passage we see that Musa alayhi salam is for the first time hearing and talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told him to go to Fir'aun, to go and confront Fir'aun, the most oppressive leader, the one who has done horrible things to women and children. And despite the fact that Musa alayhi salam is actually has been taken out from the land, he's a fugitive, he's a wanted man, he's not supposed to come back, and it seems in the worldly sense, completely impossible for him to do this, right? But instead of saying to Allah Azza wa Jal that it's not possible, I can't possibly do this, instead he immediately recognizes who he is talking to. He says, Rabbi, right? My Rabb, my Lord, my Master, the one who has taken care of me throughout my entire life, the one who has sustained me and sustained my heartbeat throughout my entire life. And in that moment, he recognizes the power of the one he's talking to. He recognizes the power of Allah Azza wa Jal. And, instead of saying to him, I can't do it, it's too hard, instead of that being his immediate response, or I think I'm going to fail, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for exactly what he needs to make it happen, right? Give me what I need so that I can do it. Recognizing that I think I'm going to fail. In my mind, I can't see it working out, but I recognize that only with your help, only with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help can I succeed and can I move forward. And so, it's that realization that we can't really do anything on our own anyways. So it's that realization for myself, and I hope it helps others, of turning to Allah. And what do we ask when we turn to Allah in that moment of everything seems impossible? He makes this very specific dua, right? That give me the abilities to do it. So let's see what he asks for. He asks for 4 things. The first thing he asks for, Rabbi shrah li sadri, that open up and expand my chest for me, right? This sense of make it easier for me to breathe, right? Make my breathing easier for me. Make this not seem so daunting, not seem so difficult. And I want you to think of that aspect as the aspect of helping my heart, helping me, my thought processes and my heart towards this. And the next thing he says is, make my task easy for me, right? Put ease in my task. And that's the aspect of that work or that effort. Like, we know that something has to be done. Some step has to be taken. But we know that we cannot take that step without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting ease in it for us. And the next is, untie the knot from my tongue, to that aspect of the speech. Make my speech, make me able to say the things that I need to say. And the fourth thing, which often, we don't mention because we mention the first part of the dua, he actually mentions the fourth thing is give me a gift of someone from my family to help me. So he realizes, that I can't do this alone. I need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to put ease in this and to help me in each and every single one of these things. But along with that, I need the help of my family, meaning I need support people around me. I cannot do this alone. And for me, these four things, reflecting on it, goes back to that hadith that we ended with last time, right? That, the Muslim, is one who, when you see an evil, you're trying to change it with your hand. If you're not able to do it, you try to change it with your tongue. If you're still not able to do it, then you change it with your heart. That's the weakest. And these are the things that Musa alayhi salam is asking for. And then along with that aspect of ensuring that we surround ourselves with people who can support us through this, whether that's seeking help from family, from friends, or, from a professional, from therapists. That is necessary. And then the beautiful way that this passage ends is he explains why, right? Why do I need all this? How am I going to get through this truly? The way that I'm truly going to get through this is through remembering and praising and glorifying how perfect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and remembering and reflecting on all the ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been taking care of us, all the ways that He has been overseeing us throughout our lives. And when you look at the story of Musa alayhi salam, sometime going back and thinking about every single trial that Musa alayhi salam went through, and similarly with other prophets, Yusuf alayhi salam, and despite those, extremely difficult, trying situations, to still be able to say that you have been overseeing my entire life. And then immediately, as soon as he makes this dua, not even hesitation, not even a second passes, the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replies, your request has been granted. And we recognize that when we, as a reflection for myself, that if I work to, instead of seeing something as impossible for me to get through, if I can get to the point, which we recognize today that it can be very difficult for some people, this is not the path for everybody because of different traumas that people have gone through. This is just something that reflected and helped me. When I can get to that place where I am asking and I'm making that dua to Allah Azza wa Jal for what I need to be able to do the task that He has put in front of me and to get through it, then we know as Muslims 100%, we don't have any doubt that Allah Azza wa Jal has already answered those prayers. And He says, you have been granted your request. And then, subhanAllah, the next passage that we didn't show actually goes, Allah Azza wa Jal is telling Musa alayhi salam, look at all the things that I've done for you. When you were doing this is what happened. And when this happened to you, this is what happened. And this is how I took care of you. And on and on and on. And so we pray that we are able to meet Allah Azza wa Jal with Him being pleased with us, in a sense that then He can tell us and show us all the ways that He has taken care of us, all the little minutiae and the details that we might not have recognized in this life, of how exactly every situation was put in the perfect place for us in the perfect time by Allah Azza wa Jal. That's sort of one of our dreams as Muslims, is to be able to meet Allah Azza wa Jal with Him being pleased with us in this situation. So, Jazakallah khair for all those who have stayed on with us. I know we again went over the time, but Alhamdulillah, I think this was our first effort in doing these kinds of workshops, and we've learned a lot from this as well. So in the future, when we have these kinds of events, we know better about how to deal with the time and the different kinds of issues with live sessions. So Jazakumullah khair, everyone. I think we'll end on that note. I was hoping that Ustaza would be here to share some final words, but I think there's some technical issues. And inshallah, we will end on that, and we will make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings complete healing to every single person who has been affected by this, and to allow each and every person who has listened to this and those who have not listened to it, that we become a source of change for this in the ummah, to bring healing and to stop the oppression and stop the injustices that are going on in our ummah. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.